and veteran suicide. My name is Nick Caldas and I have the honour of being the chair of this.
And the painting on my cloak represents the black swan. I'm here today in my capacity as a song woman for the Turrbal people. It is a thing that my grandfather was actually a song man, and first after the 20th century did many of the ceremonies here. First half of the 20th century did many of the ceremonies here in Brisbane as a song man whenever the Queensland government needed Aboriginal presidents actually on activity. So when we do welcome to country, that is done as a blessing of the gathering and the song. I will do that in the future while, but as a statement of reconciliation, I've just put two lines from the Australian National Anthem within my welcome to country, and it's done in the Turrbal language. I was actually asked to write the whole anthem for the Indigenous All-Stars game a few years ago. Maranga, Jagungunayungum. Ayan Maranga, Jagungunayungum. Garing in the Nami, Jijimobiron. 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 Mayan Maranga, Jagungunayungum. Mayan Maranga, Jagungunayungum.
Thank you. On behalf of the Royal Commission, we'd like to respect traditional owners and custodians of the land on which this event is taking place and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which people are joining us virtually through the live stream. We extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples present today at the hearing and joining virtually. We recognise your continuing connection to land, sea, culture and community. I'd like to now introduce the Official Secretary to the Royal Commission, Dr. James Popple, who will read the letters patent.
Commissioners, on 8 July 2021, the Governor-General, His Excellency General the Honourable David Hurley, AC, DSC retired, issued letters patent which established this Royal Commission. You each have copies of those letters patent and copies have been made available to people here today. The letters patent are also available at the Royal Commission's website, defenceveteransuicide.royalcommission.gov.au. Commissioners, I won't read the letters patent in their entirety, but I respectfully remind you that they appoint you to be a Commission of Inquiry and require and authorise you to inquire into the following matters. A. Systemic issues and any common themes among defence and veteran deaths by suicide, or defence members and veterans who have other lived experience of suicide behaviour or risk factors, including attempted or contemplated suicide, feelings of suicide, or poor mental health outcomes. B. A systemic analysis of the contributing risk factors relevant to defence and veteran death by suicide, including the possible contribution of pre-service, service, including training and deployments, transition, separation and post-service issues, such as the following. 1. The manner or time in which the defence member or veteran was recruited to the ADF. 2. The relevance, if any, of the particular branch, service or posting history, or the rank of the defence member or veteran. 3. The manner or time in which the defence member or veteran transitioned from the ADF or transitioned between service categories. 4. The availability, accessibility, timeliness and quality of health, wellbeing and support services, including mental health support services, to the defence member or veteran and the effectiveness of those services. 5. The manner and extent to which information about the defence member or veteran is held by and shared within and between different government entities. 6. The reporting and recording of information relevant to the mental and physical health of defence members and veterans at enlistment and during and after service. C. Impact of culture within the ADF, the Department of Defence and the Department of Veterans Affairs on defence members and veterans' physical and mental well-being. D, the role of non-government organisations, including ex-service organisations, in providing relevant services and support for defence members, veterans, their families and others. E, protective and rehabilitative factors for defence members and veterans who have lived experience of suicide behaviour or risk factors. F, any systemic issues in the current availability and effectiveness of support services for and engagement with families and others. 1, affected by defence and veteran death by suicide, or 2, who have supported a defence member or veteran with lived experience of suicide behaviour or risk factors. G, any systemic issues in the nature of defence members and veterans' engagement with the Department of Defence, the Department of Veterans Affairs, or other Commonwealth, state or territory government entities, including those acting on behalf of those entities, about support services, claims or entitlements relevant to defence and veterans' death by suicide, or relevant to defence members and veterans who have other lived experience of suicide behaviour or risk factors, including any systemic issues engaging with multiple government entities. H, the legislative and policy frameworks administered by the Department of Defence, the Department of Veterans Affairs and other Commonwealth, state or territory government entities relating to the support services, claims and entitlements referred to in paragraph G. I, any systemic risk factors contributing to defence and veteran death by suicide, including the following. 1, defence members and veterans' social or family contexts. 2, housing or employment issues for defence members and veterans. 3, defence members and veterans' economic and financial circumstances. J, any matter reasonably incidental to a matter referred to in paragraphs A to I, or that you believe is reasonably relevant to your inquiry. As you know, Commissioners, you are required by the letters patent to submit an interim report not later than 11 August 2022 and a final report of the results of your inquiry and your recommendations not later than 15 June 2023. Commissioners.
Thank you, Dr. Popple. Current and former members of the Australian Defence Force make unique sacrifices on behalf of the nation. My fellow Commissioners and I thank them and their families for all they do and all they have done. As set out in the letters patent, this Royal Commission recognises that every death by suicide is a tragic event and that there is an over-representation of defence and veteran deaths by suicide in this country. In the spirit of these letters patent, we acknowledge all those who have a lived experience of suicide. We acknowledge the lives lost. We acknowledge those who have made an attempt on their life or are vulnerable to suicide. And we acknowledge those bereaved by suicide, their families, partners, children, parents, friends, colleagues and supporters. On behalf of the nation, the establishment of this Royal Commission requires that we examine, understand and expose all systemic issues and risk factors concerning defence and veteran deaths by suicide, and that we identify any and all actions necessary to address these issues and risks, so that we may reduce and prevent future deaths. The significance and magnitude of this work is not lost on us. We know that the defence and veteran community will be watching closely, and rightly so. We're honoured and humbled by the gravity of the task ahead, and we're focused on the opportunities for change and healing. The establishment of this Royal Commission comes as a result of the tireless efforts of many people whose lives have been affected and indeed changed by suicide. These individuals, organisations and support networks have shared their personal stories, have championed change and have brought this critical issue to national attention. We'd like to acknowledge some of these people. Dan Mealy, Heston Russell, Karen Bird, Nikki Jamieson, Julianne Finney, Alan Ashmore, Connie Boglis, Deborah Morris, Martin Rowlands, Glenn Colomites, Stuart McCarthy, Bill Westhead, Tyson Potter, Jan Hewitt, Glenda Weston, Colleen Pillen, Loretta Somerville and Scott Harris, Bonnie Perry, Charles Williams, Aaron Gray, Trent Bourne, Phoebe Donaldson, Marcus Saltmarsh and Leisha Taylor. We also wish to acknowledge all those members of Parliament who are passionate supporters of veterans and serving military personnel and who have advocated for this commission to be established. This Royal Commission is a testament to these and many other voices. Our terms of reference explicitly recognise the central contribution of those affected by suicide. We assure you that the voices of all those who have experienced the impact of suicide will be heard and will help steer and inform the approach to this Royal Commission. A Royal Commission is the highest form of inquiry in Australia on matters of public importance. Its powers are broad and its resources are significant. Under our terms of reference, we're empowered to investigate a wide range of issues and factors considered necessary to understand and reduce the incidence of defence and veteran suicide. These powers will allow us to unearth issues not previously examined, to summons witnesses to appear before the Royal Commission, and to request that individuals or organisations produce evidence for our consideration. I and my fellow commissioners see this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for lasting fundamental change. If we succeed in our aims, and we hope and pray that there will be no need for further inquiries of this kind into defence and veteran suicide. Since the letters patent were issued, and despite the limitations arising from COVID-19 restrictions and interstate lockdowns, the Royal Commission has been working to establish its offices and conduct foundational research. We've been assisted in this regard by 5 preliminary roundtables held earlier this month, where we met with support and advocacy organisations, mental health experts, researchers and practitioners. We will conduct many more roundtable discussions in various locations across the country. We have conducted our first round of private sessions where we have been privileged to hear about the personal experiences of those who have served and their families and friends. We have so far received over 600 written submissions from organisations and individuals. We've also received well over 900 emails and hundreds of calls from people seeking to contribute to our work. We thank everyone who has engaged with us so far, and we encourage anyone interested in making a written submission to do so. Your contribution is invaluable. There has been significant research and a great many previous reviews and inquiries conducted on mental health and suicidality in the defence and veteran community. We recognise this important work. We recognise the many organisations and individuals who have contributed their expertise, experience and time over many years, some over generations. The Commission is indebted to your commitment and efforts. This prior work is of great relevance to the Royal Commission, and we have begun the task of examining previous reports and outcomes of previous recommendations, as well as exploring veterans' experiences and leading research in comparable countries. We will make good use of the work and efforts that came before us, but we also approach this inquiry with an open mind, open to hearing about and examining issues not considered previously where they arise. I want to take this opportunity to recognise the work of Dr. Bernadette Boss, CSC, the Interim National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention, and her dedicated staff. The preliminary interim report delivered to Government will help inform our work and the investigations we will lead over the next 2 years. Thank you. The Royal Commission will travel across Australia. We will hold public hearings and private sessions in various capital cities, regional centres, and we will convene many roundtable discussions, engaging with people with lived experience, member and veteran support and advocacy organisations, academics, experts, researchers and government officials. We also intend to consult with veterans, families, experts and institutions on proposed recommendations. Our terms of reference acknowledge that consultation can inform best practice strategies and reforms and can contribute to harm prevention and to healing. We understand that we must address any issues identified comprehensively. Our recommendations must be based on research and evidence, and it's critical that any recommendation we make can be implemented on the ground. We recognise that we're asking people to share their deeply personal stories once again, and that this will be a difficult process for many. We know that some may be disappointed by previous experiences. At all times, this Royal Commission will strive to seek and hear evidence in a trauma-informed way. We will do everything we can to avoid further harm. We'll provide choice about how and when you engage with us, how we communicate, and the support networks available to assist you in telling your story. Counsel Assisting will explain these processes in more detail. Your stories are powerful and will be critical to the success of this inquiry. I'm honoured and humbled to have been appointed as Chair of this Royal Commission. I intend to use the best of my experience to inform the Royal Commission's ultimate recommendations. I come to this work as an investigator with an inquiring investigator's mindset. I will look to investigate, examine and expose issues. This has been a consistent thread throughout my professional life. As a criminal investigator for almost 4 decades, in my work in the Homicide Squad up to as Deputy Commissioner of Police, and in my work with the United Nations. I led investigations into the assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri, and I investigated the use of chemical weapons in the Syrian conflict, for which I spent time in Syria. Throughout these duties, I have tried to right wrongs and to help those who cannot help themselves. I've also served in Iraq as a senior police advisor with coalition forces, living and working alongside our troops. While I cannot say I have felt the impact of suicide, I have walked the ground in conflict zones. I have some insight into the environment in which our Defence Force operates and the difficulties faced by those re-assimilating to an Australian life. As Chair, I acknowledge the responsibility of this position and the challenge ahead. I'm going to be accompanied in this inquiry by my fellow Commissioners, who bring with them a formidable breadth and depth of experience and expertise. The contribution of my fellow Commissioners will be invaluable to the Royal Commission's work. The Honourable James Douglas QC has over 40 years of prominent legal experience, including 16 years of service as a judge of the Supreme Court of Queensland, from which he retired in 2020. Commissioner Douglas was appointed Queen's Counsel in 1989 after more than a decade at the bar. The Commission will benefit enormously from the fairness and rigour he brings to the complex issues before us. In a career spanning 30 years, Dr. Peggy Brown AO has held mental health leadership and advocacy roles in government and in the private sector, including as the Chief Executive Officer of the National Mental Health Commission. As a Fellow of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, Commissioner Brown has an in-depth understanding of Australia's mental health system and the challenges it presents to the veteran community. We will hear directly from Commissioner Douglas and Commissioner Brown shortly. To those affected by suicide, and on behalf of the Royal Commission, I make this promise. We will listen with empathy, we will act with compassion and without fear or favour, and we will learn from your stories in order to make a real difference to the lives of serving and former personnel and their families. Excuse me. We acknowledge that the task ahead is not straightforward. We are dealing with a system of operation and support that has evolved over many years. We're examining support systems that have struggled to keep pace with the nature of modern warfare and modern life. We know that the defence and veteran community is dynamic and varied. We recognise that the experience of each individual who is a member of this community is unique and important. This complexity adds to the challenge of the work. I believe that we are a nation that recognises and values the contribution and sacrifice made by our military personnel. And so we must meet the challenge of raising the welfare and well-being of the defence and veteran community. We must respond effectively to the unique experiences faced by service personnel, past, present and their families. It's my hope that our work over the coming 2 years will not only raise Australia's understanding of the complex nature of suicide in the defence and veteran community, but will positively contribute to better mental health supports and responses to suicide on a national level. This Royal Commission is united in its belief that our work presents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to ensure that Australia does all it can to support and reduce the impacts of service on military personnel, veterans and their loved ones. Every person who joins Defence Forces must be looked after before, during and after their service. To everyone joining us today in this room and online across the country, and to the defence and veteran community, please know that we feel the great weight of responsibility that has been entrusted to us. We will do our utmost to meet the task we have been set. I'd like to introduce Commissioner James Douglas.
Chief Commissioner Caldas, Commissioner Brown, Senior Counsel assisting Kevin Connor and Peter Gray, the Junior Counsel and the solicitors from King and Wood Mallisons assisting us, my colleagues on the Royal Commission staff, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honour, a privilege and a great responsibility to have been appointed as a Commissioner to this Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. I am James Douglas and have recently retired after 16 years as a Judge of the Supreme Court of Queensland. That experience, plus the 30 years I spent before as a barrister, means that I have a deep and abiding respect for the rule of law, for the processes of judicial inquiry, and for the possibilities that the law offers to those seeking justice, including through the methods of an independent Royal Commission. Ours is an important task: to make a difference to the lives of defence members and veterans. They are those of us who willingly choose to pursue the mission of the Australian Defence Force, quote, to defend Australia and its national interests in order to advance Australia's security and prosperity. The letters patent and our terms of reference, which were read this morning, frame our endeavours. They will help us to shape our inquiry, formulate questions, and steer us in the conduct of the various forums which the Royal Commission will convene, and which are vitally important in our gathering of information and evidence. At the outset, we recognise that the terms of reference are extremely broad. We are to inquire into any systemic issues and common themes in the incidence of deaths by suicide among defence members and veterans. We must identify and examine contributing factors, including those in a defence member's life before, during and after service. We must examine the culture within the Australian Defence Force, the Department of Defence and the Department of Veterans Affairs, and any systemic issues concerning how defence members and veterans engage with those departments. Ultimately, our task is to find an answer to the vexed question why so many of our defence members and veterans take their lives by suicide, why so many others attempt to do so, and what can be done to eliminate or reduce those risks. A complex matrix of legal and policy issues will influence our work and how we formulate our response to the questions that have been put to us. This Royal Commission will examine the interrelationship between government and non-government service and support providers to understand how they respond to the needs of our most vulnerable veterans and Defence Force members. To do this, we will hear directly from those veterans and members and from their friends and families. In examining the culture of the Australian Defence Force, the Department of Defence and the Department of Veterans Affairs, and their relationship to members and veterans' well-being, we will bear in mind that they are large, complex bureaucracies with an unparalleled remit. Let me now say something of the legal background to the issues we are examining, the Australian Defence Force culture, the record of some of the previous inquiries and Royal Commissions into similar issues, something of the history of war-related trauma, and the task ahead of us. The Act establishing Australia's Naval and Military Defence Force is the Defence Act 1903. When the Act commenced in March 1904, the permanent forces consisted of the Navy and the Army, supported by a civilian militia. The Act was a relatively uncomplicated set of described powers of the forces and the prescribed duties and responsibilities of those in charge and those who served. Compensation for a member injured as a result of duty, or for family members in the event that a member died as a result of their duty, was written into the Act at its commencement. Since then, the Act has been amended some 137 times, and the modern Defence Act reflects a far more complex operating environment. Australia has had a separate Air Force for a century. Our Defence Force personnel are engaged in operations beyond traditional theatres of armed conflict and war. The Act still details the roles, responsibilities and entitlements of permanent and reserve members, but additional legislation supports other aspects of military service and post-service matters, including compensation. The Australian Defence Force, the Air Force, Army and Navy, supported by reserve members, today consists of approximately 90,000 men and women who contribute their enormous collective talent, skills and expertise, supported by equally dedicated civilian staff. The ADF's culture is moulded by this collective sense of purpose and reflected in its values. We acknowledge that despite a collective experience of service, any Defence Force member's individual experience is unique. Their recruitment, training, service type, their rank, gender, sexuality, cultural heritage, where they serve, the duration of their service and overall deployment pattern, including whether this has involved service in armed conflict, in peacekeeping or in service to community, the account of their transition and separation from defence and return to civilian life, all frame their experience and their reaction to it. So too will any instance of hazing, bullying or mistreatment or abuse of power, sexual assault and other forms of assault, and the institutional response to these matters. There have been several important inquiries into aspects of defence administration and the treatment of Defence Force members over the years. The most recent, the preliminary interim report of the National Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide Prevention, was published in September this year. We have already been examining numerous earlier reports to assess any discoverable reasons why they failed to deliver intended reforms. We hope to learn from history, be mindful to avoid duplication, and be alert to the unintended consequences of other policy reform. We note too there have been several earlier Royal Commissions into aspects of defence. We are certainly conscious of our role in contributing thoughtfully to this rich history of inquiry into complex matters of national significance. The first Royal Commission in 1902 inquired into the treatment of soldiers returning to Australia from the Boer War. It found the planning for the journey, supply of equipment and the structural integrity of the transporting ship contributed to the spread of communicable disease and the deaths of some 17 soldiers. In 1915, a Royal Commission into the Liverpool military camp found the general building conditions and the supply of goods, equipment and training provided to the troops to be inadequate for them to take the field fit and well. In 1919, the then Chief Justice of Australia, Sir Samuel Griffith, conducted a brief inquiry into the number of members of the first AIF actually fit for active service. His report filled 4 pages. In 1924, the Royal Commission into the Assessment of War Service Disabilities heard from injured soldiers and from ex-service organisations, as we now refer to them. It found that while the system for assessing injury and rewarding compensation was generally, quote, sufficient, unquote, it did not treat all soldiers equally. It found defects with sections of the then Repatriation Act, including avoidable delays in determining claims. That commission recommended changes to the way injured soldiers were treated and amendments to the Repatriation Act. In a view that still resonates, they expressed the opinion that the Repatriation Commission is greatly hampered by the inadequacy of records as to the exact state of health of soldiers upon discharge from service. The Commission has recommended against any general principle that the Repatriation Department deal with mental disease appearing in ex-soldiers, recommending rather that each case must be determined upon its merits, with weight being given to a variety of circumstances associated with the claimant's service. Later Royal Commissions dealing with the loss of the HMAS Voyager and the inquiry into the allegations of the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam have also had a military or naval focus, with the latter examining some issues related to post-traumatic stress disorder. While much has improved in the way the ADF trains, supports, deploys and returns members to civilian life, Those earlier reports seem undeniably familiar to our contemporary institutional responses to unfit and unwell Defence Force members and veterans. This Royal Commission's terms of reference are very wide-ranging by comparison to the earlier ones I have mentioned dealing with the Defence Forces. That gives us the capacity and the determination to make significant recommendations to improve the existing systems. Since 1900, Australia has been engaged in significant wars and other military engagements or security interventions, including the Boer War, World War I, World War II, and the wars in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, lasting about 50 years in total, and not including peacekeeping missions. Put another way, Australia has been at war for about 40% of the time since the Commonwealth was established in 1901. This means that many thousands of Australian families have stories of an experience of military service. My own family shares such a history. My father served through the Second World War, beginning as an infantry officer in the 2nd 12th Battalion, which was part of the 18th Brigade of the 7th Division. The 18th Brigade served with the magnificent 9th Division through the siege of Tobruk in 1941, in very hard-fought engagements with the Germans under Rommel. My father was a strong, robust man, both physically and mentally, but decades later he still suffered nightmares from those experiences. His older brother was a doctor in the Australian Army Medical Corps, serving with the 9th Division in the Middle East and in New Guinea, including participation in the Battle of El Alamein and 3 opposed landings in the Pacific. Years later, when recounting his experiences on Tarakan in 1945, he relied on Wordsworth to tell his audience that he would speak of old, unhappy, far-off things and battles long ago. His collected letters sent to his parents throughout the war provide vivid insights into medical and military life in the thick of numerous bitter conflicts. Their younger brother was also an infantry officer in the 2nd 15th Battalion, again of the 9th Division. He served in the Middle East and New Guinea, fighting at El Alamein and Milne Bay in New Guinea, among many other engagements. One of their uncles, an officer in the 1st AIF, died of wounds received in action in France in 1918. He is buried at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery at Étaples in northern France. The mental distress and ill health experienced by returned soldiers from World War I is well known. Shell shock as a term appears to have had its origins in France, and the belief at that time that the mental phenomena which followed immediately on an observed or supposed physical shock to the brain were due to macro, micro or ultramicroscopic lesions of the brain tissue. The debilitating psychological and physical symptoms have been widely commented upon since and have become the subject of much historical and cultural writing. Historically, references to battle fatigue, stress, trauma and other symptoms experienced as phenomena of warfare have their origins traced to the Roman and Greek wars and 18th and 19th century European battles, with patients described as suffering from a severe type of melancholy and increasing mental depression, where sometimes the patient commits suicide, but more often the patient surrenders to death without resistance. But people's suffering was not met with sympathy. Reports of mental ill health traced to the Crimean War refer to soldiers malingering to avoid further battle, while others, self-medicated with alcohol, supplied to them to avoid the horror of war, a tacit acknowledgement that fear could cause a powerful depressing effect. Things may have begun to change around the time of the First World War because of developments in neurology, psychology and psychiatry. The first AIF had the advantage of having among its medical staff a Major A.W. Campbell, described in the official medical history as one of the most scientific, broad-minded and able neurological specialists that the country has produced. In 1916, he wrote an article in the Medical Journal of Australia saying that his experiences at Gallipoli vividly demonstrated to my fellow officers and myself that neuroses and psychoses contributed to modern war casualty lists more heavily than we had previously supposed. It was manifest that these conditions among Australian troops were frequent. The length of the discussion of that type of neurosis in our First World War official medical history speaks clearly of the recognition of the medical importance for the military as a whole of managing what were then called war neuroses. The issues remained significant for the country's economy after the war, with the so-called, quote, problems of pensioning, unquote, the returned traumatised veterans. So the issues we are to deal with are not new. Contemporary literary writers also were awake to the issues. The German soldier and post-First World War author of All Quiet on the Western Front, Erich Maria Remarque, wrote of a soldier in the trenches of World War I, anticipating life after the war, saying, "One thing I do know, everything that is sinking into us like a stone now while we are in the war will rise up again when the war is over, and that's when the real life and death struggle will start." The modern work of organisations such as the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare indicates that rates of death by suicide among veterans are significantly higher than among those still serving or in the reserve forces. That gives added force to Remarque's observations. By the early 1980s, after the war in Vietnam, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, was the term used by the authors of the official history of that conflict to describe these symptoms. It is now clear that those who have suffered PTSD appear to be at significantly greater risk of death by suicide than those who have not. PTSD symptoms may not become evident until well after the original stressful event. Some of the evidence now suggests also that the children of Vietnam veterans have 3 times the expected rate for suicide. It is surprising that this has not been investigated further. Those Vietnam veterans' conditions of service also resonate with our more recent conflicts. As the authors of that official history say, we know of disturbed, alienated survivors from the Great War, the Second World War and the Korean War. Probably every war has left this terrible legacy, whether designated shell shock, battle fatigue, delayed reaction, post-war neurosis, battle shock, or the current term post-traumatic stress disorder. Though their tours of duty were short by comparison with those endured by their fathers and grandfathers, the Vietnam veterans suffered conditions that were peculiar to their cankered war. They fought an enemy that was generally indistinguishable from the village populations they were meant to protect. An enemy that included women and children who might be implicated in setting lethal ambushes and maiming booby traps and landmines. Many soldiers had come to doubt the cause for which they had been sent to Vietnam in a war which had never been declared and which had ended in defeat. They remembered mates killed by accidents and friendly fire. PTSD is not limited to the lower ranks of soldiers, sailors and members of the Air Force. The recent tragic death by suicide of Major General Matt Holmes, Commandant General of the Royal Marines in the UK, may be a recent example. Nor should PTSD be treated as some form of character failure or lack of bravery. Marshal of the RAF, Sir Sholto Douglas, later Lord Douglas of Curtleside, a distant relation of mine, suffered from PTSD according to his daughter, Catherine Campbell, a neuroscientist. She believes he suffered from the condition from early in his life, including from his experiences as a fighter pilot in the First World War, through his career in World War II as Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command, Middle East Command and Coastal Command, and after that war as the military governor of the British zone in occupied Germany. The final stage in his working life was his service as chairman of British European Airways. Catherine Campbell herself has written extensively about PTSD, and in her biography of her father said, "This re-experiencing of traumatic memories is one of the fundamental symptoms of PTSD, in which not only is there psychological distress, but also a reactivation of the stress response that occurred at the time of the trauma, sometimes called fight or flight. Stress hormones are activated, producing physiological symptoms such as sweating and increased heart rate. Repeated activation of the traumatic memory tends to cause a worsening of the associated stress response, meaning that there is a progressive increase in a person's reactivity with each recurrence. Also central to this condition is a corresponding deficit of frontal cortical functioning. Another part of the brain involved is the hippocampus. If these structures involved in fear and stress systems are overactivated repeatedly, as occurs in combat or other war-related situations, this results in increasing dysregulation over time. Chronic exposure to this cascade of events has been shown to increase the risk for multiple physical disorders, which challenges the notion of PTSD as involving only the mind. In fact, it is unhelpful to think of it only in these terms, since this ignores the growing body of evidence that demonstrates the need to reframe it as a whole body or systemic condition. In speaking so much about war-related trauma, I do not seek to minimise the other issues stemming from military service that can lead Defence Force members and veterans to die by suicide that we will also examine. Let me go on then to talk about the task ahead of us. It seems that we have not entirely discarded the views of those earlier physicians about the shame or stigma attaching to psychological health from our collective consciousness. The stigma associated with the declaration of ill health and psychological ill health in particular, along with notions of strength and the physical prowess associated with military might, remain key, powerful images associated with our characterisation of a perfect warrior. It is impermeable and difficult to shift. The study and treatment of mental ill health has matured in recent decades. Notwithstanding some persistent challenges in dealing with suffering, we take far more seriously the presentation of psychological distress. We are appropriately concerned with the ongoing well-being of all who have served in our armed forces, but there is much room for improvement. This is urgent and necessary. Shame and stigma must be challenged if the institutional treatment of unwell defence members and veterans is to improve. How to deliver an improved institutional response to the misery suffered by defence members and veterans, which is appropriate, sensitive and restorative, will be a vital subject of our inquiry. We are all deeply conscious of the magnitude and complexity of the task ahead of us. We cannot complete that task successfully unless people who have attempted suicide or bereaved family members or those who have experienced mental ill health and recovered are prepared to share their stories. I thank in advance the many individuals, families, friends, government and non-government agencies, academics and other experts who will assist the Royal Commission in our work. The information and evidence gathered through our collective engagement on the sensitive, personal and complex issue of suicide will help us understand why attempts at institutional reform have not resulted in the improvements anticipated. We thank everyone who is brave enough to engage with us. We are grateful to you for allowing us to listen to your accounts. We appreciate the trust you have placed in us to find solutions. As Commissioners, we share an optimistic view of the future. We hope that through our investigation, inquiry and policy work, we can develop recommendations that result in long-lasting and effective change. Just as the Australian Defence Force invests heavily in its members while in active service, we need to ensure that investment is upheld at every juncture of a veteran's future career. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Douglas. I'd like to introduce Commissioner Peggy Brown.
Good morning, and thank you for your interest in this important inquiry and for your attendance today, whether that's here in person or via the live streaming. I'm deeply honoured to be one of the Commissioners for the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide. Every Defence member or veteran who has died by suicide is more than a name, a number or a story. They are someone real, someone with family who loved and cared for them and loved them still. Someone who had colleagues that worked alongside them, friends, neighbours and other acquaintances whose lives they touched in many different ways, and almost certainly someone who had a multitude of hopes and aspirations for their life. But each of these individuals decided to end their life. We may never fully understand their reasons, or we may never fully know their reasons or understand their decision or the action they took. We are certainly not here to judge them, to find them wanting, or to deem them to have failed. We are here to better understand the circumstances they faced. We're here to learn how and what to do better, so that for others facing similar circumstances, death by suicide is not the outcome. As a psychiatrist, I'm aware that most people who have suicidal thoughts or plans, even those who make a suicide attempt or who ultimately die by suicide, don't actually want to die. What they almost always want is for their life to be different, for the things that are troubling them so greatly to be acknowledged, addressed and remedied, instead of continuing to cause them immense and unbearable pain, distress and suffering. It is in those circumstances where suicide becomes an option. So while many may see Defence and Veterans suicide as the problem and therefore look for solutions that provide better assistance for those who are suicidal, I don't see that as the main goal of this Royal Commission. Of course, it's important to be able to effectively assist those in suicidal distress and to continuously improve the ways in which we do that. But if that is all we do, I fear it will not be enough to stem the tide. I believe we need to recognise that to those who are experiencing suicidal thoughts or who take action to end their life, suicide feels like the solution, a final, devastating solution to the underlying problem or problems which, despite all of their efforts, they've not been able to remedy. Our job at this Royal Commission, therefore, is to identify the real root of the problem or problems that are leading so many to think about suicide, attempt suicide, or to take their own lives because they perceive and believe there is no other option. We intend to work with you and to lead this work with compassion, focusing on understanding and accountability. For families, partners, parents and children in particular, the pain and impact of losing their loved one to suicide is felt across lifetimes, often across generations. We want to listen and engage meaningfully with families and support networks and hear your experiences, not just about the end of the journey, but from the start of the defence journey, to help us to identify the causes of the problem and what needs to be done to address the many contributing factors. As a medically trained practitioner, I know we can learn in many different ways and from many different sources. But when it comes to changing culture and practice, the voices of those with lived experience, experts by experience, are both informative and influential. This Royal Commission wants to hear the full breadth of voices, your voices, to the greatest extent possible in the time we have available, to assist us to understand what really happens, what is contributing to this tragedy, and what needs to change so that the distress and the loss of lives does not continue. Suicide is a complex phenomenon. It's rarely caused by a single issue. It's also a problem with which the broader community is grappling. How can we reduce the risk factors, enhance the protective factors, and intervene at key points so our suicide rate reduces? Now, whilst we need to acknowledge that defence and veteran suicides occur within and are linked to this broader community context, we must also acknowledge that military service and subsequently life as a veteran brings unique aspects that must be considered over and above broader community suicide prevention strategies. The many previous reviews and inquiries into defence and veteran suicide and related matters have examined many of these unique contextual aspects and collectively have delivered a vast number of recommendations. Some of you may be aware that I was involved with one of those reviews when I was at the National Mental Health Commission in 2017. Yet in 2021, as in 2020 and in 2019 and the years before, and despite some of those past recommendations having been implemented and resulting in changes that seemingly were for the better, suicide deaths of defence members and veterans have continued undiminished. It would not be surprising, therefore, if some of you have doubts about what will be different this time and whether things can really change, given that we are here in this position after so many previous inquiries and reviews. And I think we need to be honest. The task before us will be challenging, and it will no doubt be hard. The issues are complex, and the systems, policies, practices and cultures in which those issues occur are also complex and sometimes difficult to navigate and to understand. However, the challenges provide us no excuse. The consequences we are dealing with vastly outweigh the complexity. The Royal Commission has powers to investigate with precision the systemic underpinnings of suicidality in defence members and veterans, to get evidence and information not previously available, to locate, access and analyse this material, and to connect these findings to forge emerging possibilities for the future. And finally, to put forward recommendations with a strong eye for accountability mechanisms that can ensure the recommendations are implemented and are achieving their intended goal. Now, every defence and veteran death by suicide is a tragedy, a cause for immense sadness, not just for those left behind or because of the unfulfilled hopes and aspirations and the lost potential of those who have died. It's also because these events represent systems and services that have failed to prevent such deaths, when the risks are now very well known and in fact, as Commissioner Douglas has pointed out, have been known for some time. While I don't believe that any government department, system or service in Australia sets out to fail or to lack compassion, there can be no doubt that systemic issues are contributing to the suicide deaths of our defence members and veterans. And that is something this Royal Commission must change, absolutely. This Royal Commission will carefully scrutinise the systems involved to look for what must change. We will look at issues from recruitment to postings, deployments, discharge and transition from the Australian Defence Force. We will look at military culture to understand its impact. We will look at the processes and performance of the Department of Veterans Affairs and other relevant government departments. We will look at their policies and procedures and seek to understand whether their practice aligns with their words. We will look at treatment, rehabilitation and support services for defence members, veterans and their families, including those available through Defence and DVA, through other government departments, through member and veteran support and advocacy organisations, and through private providers. Now, some of you may expect that my background as a psychiatrist would have me focusing primarily on mental health issues. And clearly, some defence members and veterans do experience mental health concerns, and we acknowledge that some mental health diagnoses are associated with a higher risk of suicidal behaviour and even death by suicide. But I feel I can already say that focusing on mental health issues alone will not address the root of this problem. We need to look for the underlying systemic problems that contribute to or that lead to people being suicidal. They may well be the same issues that lead to people experiencing mental health issues. We certainly will look into the prevalence of mental health issues and physical health issues as well, and we'll seek to identify what's contributing to those. We'll look also at preventative interventions like screening and education, and to the access and effectiveness of treatment and rehabilitation services, including emerging and innovative treatments, and to ongoing research efforts. But without a doubt, we need to look broadly and think more holistically if we are to make a real difference. In 2012, the National Mental Health Commission promoted the concept of a contributing life, one that is meaningful and satisfying, where the safety and security of the person is assured, and also the safety and security of their accommodation and their finances, where they have meaningful connections with loved ones, friends, community and their culture, where they have something meaningful to do and something to look forward to each day, and where access to support, treatment and care is available when and how it is needed. In short, everyone leading a contributing life should thrive, not just survive. As part of this Royal Commission, we need to examine to what extent defence members and veterans enjoy a contributing life, and where they don't, to identify what needs to be done to change that. So we have a lot of ground to cover. My final comments are that this Royal Commission must focus on two things in particular: accountability and compassion. Accountability is essential for two reasons. Firstly, to ensure that everything possible is being done to reduce the risk of death by suicide of our defence members and veterans. But more importantly, because real change cannot occur without accountability. What is required is not just recommendations, not just plans or projects, but real, tangible, sustained change based on true accountability. Compassion is the other essential. We must achieve responses that demonstrate to defence members and veterans and their families that they matter, you matter, and that you are more than a name or a number caught up in a complex web of policy, procedure, legislation and bureaucracy. As a former Chief Executive Officer and as someone who has spent much of my career endeavouring to change systems, I understand how challenging it can be, especially in highly complex environments. However, we need to be very clear at the outset of this Royal Commission. The death by suicide of a defence member or veteran cannot be seen as simply the personal choice of an individual in distress, nor can it be seen as an outcome that is unable to be influenced by the actions of government departments and support agencies. All departments, all agencies involved with defence members, veterans and their families, and especially those that deal most directly with them, must acknowledge that their actions can and do influence the decisions of people in suicidal distress. That is why both compassion and accountability are so central to our inquiry. In finishing, I just wish to say I'm sincerely committed to working to find tangible ways to achieve system-wide, multi-organisational change and commitment to preventing further defence and veterans suicide and to delivering kinder, safer, more compassionate services. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. I'd now like to introduce Senior Counsel Assisting Mr Kevin Connor, SC, and Mr Peter Gray, QC.
Thank you, Commissioners. I appear with Peter Gray, with Peter Singleton, with Gabrielle Rubigotti, with Leonard Sheptuha, and with Madeline Bridget. We are independent barristers. Commissioners, we've been appointed by the Commonwealth Attorney General as counsel assisting this Royal Commission. On behalf of the counsel assisting team and all the staff of the Royal Commission, we, as you have done, Commissioners, acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay our respects to their leaders, past, present and emerging. We deeply recognise and have great respect for the service of current and former members of the Australian Defence Forces, service to our nation and to its people. We acknowledge the immeasurable suffering involved in suicide by members of our Defence Forces and veterans. The ripples are wide, the effects are deep. We acknowledge the immense personal sufferings in suicidal ideation and its associated feelings. We acknowledge the impact on families, loved ones and friends. We acknowledge the sustained efforts of those who have been acutely impacted by these matters and who have focused public attention on defence and veteran suicide. Commissioners, we already have some appreciation of the complexities and the magnitude of the challenges ahead. Commissioners, we are determined to do our very best, indeed our utmost, to assist you, Commissioners, in your task. Mr Gray will address you on three important aspects of the work being done, including the importance of lived experience to this Royal Commission. The significance of our listening to the lived experience of people cannot be overstated. It is so important to the Commission. People with lived experience may be people who've lost loved ones and are bereaving the loss of those loved ones. They may be people who themselves have experienced suicidal feelings, thoughts and ideation. Those who have endured self-harm or have attempted suicide. Commissioners, people with lived experience may be people who care for and love people who are enduring these difficulties. Mr Gray will speak. I will say something again about the further conduct of this inquiry.
Thank you, Commissioners. We appreciate that this inquiry represents an opportunity to listen to and learn from the accounts of many people with lived experience and to bring together what is learned from those people to what can be learned from data, research and all other sources of relevant information. And as the Chair and the other Commissioners have already said, the letters patent place great stress on the importance to this inquiry of lived experience. All the staff of the Royal Commission hope to facilitate a great many lived experience accounts being heard during the inquiry. We well understand that we need to exercise great care in doing this. The letters patent refer to the need to establish accessible and appropriate trauma-informed arrangements for defence members and veterans and others with lived experience. These arrangements have already been established and they'll benefit from continuous review and improvement over time. In engaging with people who have lived experience, solicitors assisting and counsel are led by skilled and dedicated members of the counselling and inquiries team. And where appropriate, the counselling and inquiries team can refer people to external services for ongoing support. The Royal Commission is open to any defence members, veterans, family or other support people who wish to share accounts of their lived experience, and to do so in a form that is safe, supportive and appropriate. And it will be a form of that person's choice. For some, this might be no more than a written submission, whether named or even anonymous. I'll just say something about the submissions received so far. The Royal Commission has already received more than 630 submissions, and we hope to receive many more. Common issues raised by submissions include, and this is just to name a few, bullying, the treatment of women, sexual assaults, physical assaults, the need for better protection for younger enlisted members, the need for external mental health support after deployments, the complex issues arising around the loss of identity and community after transition from the Defence Force to civilian life. Now, moving from submissions to other modes of engagement with the Royal Commission. Other people may wish to have a private session with a Commissioner, and those have already begun. Submissions and requests for a private session can be made via an online form on the Royal Commission's website, or people can call for assistance to make a request in another way. For example, the submissions form can be printed and sent in by mail to the GPO address on the website. The operator will display the Royal Commission's website and phone number briefly now. If you can't go to the website, please call Monday to Friday 1800 329 095. 1800 329 095 for assistance. The Royal Commission is open to all forms of engagement and wishes each person to make their own choice about what way of communicating is best for them and what aspects of their life story they wish to tell or not to tell. We recognise that some people may not wish to share their experiences or may change their minds, and that's okay. But we hope to receive perhaps hundreds of such accounts, and that many dozens of them will be heard in public hearing. I want to say something more about what happens when a person might give a lived experience account in a public hearing. Generally speaking, Commissioners, it will be unnecessary and inappropriate for people giving these accounts to be cross-examined. The reason is we'll be calling this evidence as the subjective impressions of the witness, and we will not be seeking specific findings from you based on each such account. We'll be encouraging people with lived experience to give their oral evidence at hearings in a way that avoids specific allegations against identifiable individuals. Staff of the Royal Commission are available to help people to give their accounts, but we cannot and do not provide legal advice or assistance. Legal assistance and advice for the purposes of interacting with the Royal Commission is available, however, free of charge through an independent Defence and Veterans Legal Service. This is operated by Legal Aid, independently of government and independently of the Royal Commission. If you wish to get in touch with the Defence and Veterans Legal Service, please email defencevetlegal@legalaid.qld.gov.au or call Monday to Friday 1800 333 1800. I will mention one of the difficult issues we're encountering. It arises where close family or next of kin wish to have access to Defence and DVA records about a loved one who has died by suicide, beyond the records that would be available publicly under the Freedom of Information Act. Commissioners, for the purposes of your inquiry, you may exercise coercive powers to require the production of documents from Defence and DVA or others under the Royal Commissions Act. You have already exercised these powers quite extensively, including by issuing 17 notices to produce documents and 5 notices to give information to government bodies, as well as notices to support organisations, coroners and some experts. Already, over 22,000 documents have been produced, including nearly 7,000 by Defence and more than 4,000 by DVA. However, generally speaking, the Royal Commission will not be able to provide to family members or next of kin copies of Defence or DVA records about their loved ones. I need to explain why. These records can only be disclosed or used for the purposes of the inquiry, not for the purposes of directly assisting family members in seeking information. The only exception we can see is that there may be circumstances in which limited access to these records can be granted to family or next of kin, in some cases where necessary for the inquiry for this to occur. I will now explain how this could arise. Next year, the Royal Commission will hold a limited number of hearings into the specific circumstances of individual Defence members or veterans who have died by suicide, with the participation of individuals and agencies with a legitimate interest in the findings that may be made in those inquiries. In previous Royal Commissions, hearings of this kind into specific events have sometimes been called case studies. It will only be possible for this Royal Commission to conduct a small number of such hearings because of time constraints and the need already spoken about to ensure that all systematic issues in the terms of reference are addressed. But there will be some of these inquiries and hearings. Where a hearing in the nature of a case study is conducted, family members and next of kin are likely to be able to participate in that by being granted leave to appear, and also it's likely that individuals and agencies against whom adverse findings might be made will also participate. Persons with leave to appear in such hearings